You think you know betrayal, but you have no idea. What would you do if the love of your life, the one person you trusted above all else, shattered that trust in the most unforgivable way? I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, vengeance, and what happens when you push someone too far. I was a soldier, a veteran of war, but nothing could prepare me for the battle that was about to unfold in my own home. A battle where there was no uniform, no rules, and no mercy. Stick around till the end, because you won't believe how this story ends. I thought I had everything. My life had settled into a rhythm I could handle. After my time in Iraq, I came home, a man who'd seen the worst of humanity and survived. I wasn't the same man who left, but I knew how to adapt. I had a quiet little mechanic shop in Chicago now, a steady job that kept me busy. The peace I fought so hard for was in my hands. But there was one thing I didn't expect. Megan, my wife. We'd been together for over 5 years, and I thought I knew her inside and out. But there were cracks in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. She became distant, unreachable. Her smile seemed a little too forced. First, I chalked it up to stress. Life hadn't exactly been easy for either of us since I returned. I had nightmares. Sometimes I'd wake up in a cold sweat, and she'd just stare at me, not knowing what to say, what to do. I thought maybe it was just me, maybe I was the one who had changed too much. But something felt off. Then came the little things. Her phone. She'd leave it face down, always on silent. The late-night messages that flashed when I happened to catch a glimpse. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Soldiers aren't great at adjusting to peace. We're trained to watch for danger, to always be alert. But this wasn't a war zone. This was my home. I trusted Megan, or I thought I did. Maybe, in the back of my mind, I was afraid that she was slipping away from me. So one night, I decided to do what I'd never done before. I followed her. Not like a stalker, but just watched. It wasn't hard. She didn't notice me at first. I trailed her car as she made a few unexpected turns, then parked in front of a small, upscale gym. She went inside, and I waited. I didn't know what I was expecting. I didn't even know why I stayed there, but my gut told me something wasn't right. An hour passed, and I watched as she came out, laughing with a man. Tall, confident, with the look of someone who worked out every day. His arm was draped over her shoulder, his hand resting dangerously close to her neck. She didn't pull away. She didn't seem uncomfortable. In fact, she looked happy. That was when I knew. It wasn't a feeling anymore. It was a fact. I couldn't shake the image from my head. Megan, laughing, leaning into him, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. That man, who was he? Why did she look so at ease with him? The anger started to simmer beneath my skin, but I didn't confront her right away. Couldn't. Not yet. I needed more answers. The next few days were a blur. Every time I looked at Megan, I saw her differently. The way she moved, the way she spoke. It all seemed too calculated, too rehearsed. She'd smile at me, but it didn't reach her eyes anymore. I started to notice the little things. The lies she told me, the half-truths, the excuses. She'd say she was working late, or that she had to meet a friend. But there was always something off. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But the more I thought about it, the more everything started to add up. She was slipping away. And the worst part was, I knew I was too late to stop it. Then came the night when everything changed. Couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I picked up her phone when she wasn't looking. I felt like I was betraying her, but my hands moved on their own. I unlocked the phone. I wasn't prepared for what I found. Messages. Hundreds of them. Dozens from the same man. The gym guy. His name was Ryan, and he wasn't just some random guy. No, he was more than that. The messages were intimate, personal, things I'd never seen between us. Flirty, suggestive, and worse, promises of a future together. She called him babe, handsome, my love. The words I thought were mine, reserved only for me, were now his. I kept scrolling, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. Couldn't breathe. She had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall. But I stayed calm. I had to. If I gave in to my anger, I'd lose control. And I couldn't afford that. So I waited. The next day, when she came home late again, I knew exactly what I had to do. The house felt different when Megan walked through the door that evening. It wasn't the same warmth, the same comfort that had once filled this place. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. I didn't greet her like I usually did, didn't kiss her cheek, didn't ask about her day. I just stood there in the hallway, staring at her as she fumbled with her keys, avoiding my gaze. "Hi," she said quietly, but there was an edge to her voice. She knew something was off, but she had no idea how close I was to discovering everything. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice low, controlled. I had to keep my composure. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the beginning of the end. She knew that too, but she didn't know how much I already knew. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty before she answered, her usual confidence slipping. "Just out with a friend. Work's been crazy lately, you know?" I didn't respond to that. I didn't need to. My mind was already miles ahead of her, replaying the images of her with Ryan, the words from her messages, the love she had shared with him. It was all too much to take in at once. "I know," I said flatly, finally breaking the silence. "I know about him, Ryan." She froze, her face draining of color. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room. Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was none. She couldn't lie her way out of this. "How long?" I asked, my voice growing colder. I needed to hear her say it. I needed her to admit it. She took a step back, her hands trembling. "Jack, please, I can explain." I wanted to laugh, but the pain in my chest wouldn't allow it. "Explain? There's nothing to explain. I've seen the messages. I've seen the way you look at him. You've been lying to me, to my face, for God knows how long." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just stood there, her body shaking slightly. She wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt you, but it didn't matter anymore." Her words were empty to me. Every excuse, every apology, fell on deaf ears. I was done. I wasn't going to beg for the truth anymore. The woman I thought I knew had disappeared long ago, replaced by someone who had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. "Do you think I'm stupid?" I asked, stepping closer to her. "Do you think I didn't know? You think I didn't feel the distance growing between us? You think I didn't see the way you started slipping away?" Her face crumpled, and she reached for me, but I stepped back, not wanting her touch. It felt wrong now, as if everything about our life together had been a lie. "You need to leave," I said quietly, but the finality in my voice made it clear. "I want you gone. Now." She staggered back, her expression one of disbelief. "What? Jack, please don't do this. I love you. I swear I do. This wasn't supposed to happen." But I wasn't listening. The woman I loved no longer existed. The woman standing before me was a stranger, someone who had torn apart everything we had. "Go," I repeated. "Take your things and leave." I watched her, standing there, completely broken. It wasn't the rage in her eyes, the pleading, or even the tears that made my heart harden even further. It was the realization that the woman I thought I knew had been replaced by someone else. A person who didn't value the love we shared, who didn't care about the promises she made. She was already gone, emotionally, long before I'd caught her. Megan didn't move at first. She just stood there, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, looking like a woman who had just been sentenced to a lifetime of guilt. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She was frozen in place, unsure of what to do. For a moment, I thought maybe she was hoping I'd take it all back. Maybe she was waiting for me to fold, to tell her everything would be fine, to let her walk away without facing the consequences. But I wasn't going to let her have that. I had given everything to this marriage, and now it was time for her to understand the weight of what she had done. Don't stand there and tell me you love me, I said, the bitterness in my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. Her shoulders slumped, and her face crumpled further as the reality of the situation hit her. She started to take a step toward me, but before she could get any closer, I heard a knock on the door. I didn't expect anyone. My mind immediately went to the worst possible scenario. Was it Ryan? Had he come to confront me? To gloat? To finish what he had started? My hands clenched into fists, and I took a step back, keeping my eyes locked on Megan. Stay here, I told her in a cold, commanding voice. I wasn't about to let her get away from this. Not now. I opened the door, ready for whatever was about to come. And there, standing in the doorway, was a man I hadn't seen before. Tall, with broad shoulders, a square jaw, and a smug grin plastered across his face. Ryan, Megan's lover. The man who had stolen my wife's heart, or whatever was left of it. For a moment, everything went still. I sized him up in an instant, his stance, the way he held himself. Confident, cocky, like someone who thought he had already won. The smile on his face faltered as soon as he saw me. I didn't look like the man he expected. I wasn't the broken fool begging for his wife to come back. No, I was a soldier, a veteran, a man who had seen far worse than what this idiot could throw my way. Who the hell are you? I asked, my voice low, calm, but deadly. Ryan's grin widened slightly, but there was a glimmer of hesitation in his eyes. I'm here to talk to you about your wife, he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. We need to sort this out, man. I could see the arrogance in his eyes, the way he looked at me like I was a problem he could easily get rid of. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had fought wars, I had survived what most men couldn't, and I didn't need anyone to tell me how to handle myself. I don't think you understand, I said, stepping forward. You're in my house, telling me how to fix my life. You don't get to make demands. You came here for her, but now you've got me. Ryan's eyes flickered, but he didn't back down. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I'm just here to get what's mine. The nerve, the absolute nerve. I stepped closer to him, not letting him finish. My hands were steady, my breath controlled. You don't know who you're dealing with, buddy. I'm not some guy you can bully into submission. Without warning, I moved faster than he could react, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him up against the doorframe. His eyes widened in surprise, and I felt the fear radiating from him. Good. It was about time someone showed him the reality of his situation. You're gonna leave, and you're gonna leave now, I growled, my grip tightening. You come back here and you'll regret it. I don't care who you think you are. Ryan struggled, but he was no match for me. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't someone who had been trained to survive. He was a man who thought he could waltz into my life and take what wasn't his. I shoved him backward, sending him stumbling into the yard. He looked at me, mouth open, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. His pride was bruised, but he had no choice but to turn and walk away. Before I could close the door, Megan appeared behind me, her face pale and her eyes wide. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't let her. I turned, my gaze hardening. You're leaving, I said, my voice unwavering. Now, and I mean it. I watched Megan as she stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of disbelief and fear. She opened her mouth, probably to beg, but I didn't want to hear it. Not anymore. I had given her every opportunity to prove herself worthy of my trust, but she had shattered it. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. She stepped toward me, her voice trembling. Jack, please, we can fix this. I made a mistake. I was confused. Confused? No, this wasn't a mistake. She didn't just slip up. She'd made a choice. She'd chosen him, Ryan, over me, over the life we had built together. I wasn't going to let her sweet words fool me again. I'm not your therapist, Megan. I'm your husband, and you've thrown that away. Don't come back here thinking you can fix it with a few tears. Her lips trembled, and I could see the panic setting in. She had no idea what was coming. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the nights I had spent wondering if she was cheating on me, the silence between us as she lied to my face. No, she didn't deserve pity. She deserved consequences. "I'll leave," she whispered. "But please just understand. It wasn't what you think. I never meant to hurt you." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked into the living room, knowing that if I stayed any longer, I would break. And breaking wasn't an option. Not now. Not when I had spent so many years holding my ground, fighting wars and demons of my own. I wouldn't break over her. Not anymore. Megan gathered her things, slowly, deliberately, her hands shaking with every movement. I stood by the window, watching her through the curtains, as she packed up her bags and left the house. My house. The house I had worked so hard to make a home. It wasn't hers anymore. I didn't feel anything as she drove away. Not relief. Not anger. Just emptiness. She was gone. And I had no idea what came next. But I knew one thing for sure. I was done being the victim. It was time to take control. Ryan thought he could just waltz into my life and claim my wife. Well, he was wrong. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I had survived hell, and now I was going to make sure he did too. That night I sat in my chair, thinking. I needed a plan. I needed to make them both feel the weight of their actions. I wasn't going to just let them get away with this. Not after everything I had sacrificed. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I knew would be able to help me. Mike, a guy I used to serve with in Iraq. He had connections. He knew people who could make things happen. People who could make Ryan's life a living hell. I called him, and within a few minutes we were talking business. Mike didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He understood the kind of man I was, the kind of man I had become. The man who would make sure that those who crossed him would pay the price. Whatever it takes. I told him, my voice hard. Make sure he regrets this. The next few days passed in a blur of calculated silence. Megan was gone, but her absence left a vacuum that I couldn't ignore. I spent hours alone, piecing together the wreckage of my life. My mechanic shop, once a source of peace, felt empty now. Just a shell, a reflection of the broken man I had become. But I couldn't let myself wallow in self-pity. Not anymore. I had a plan now, a purpose. And it was time to make Ryan regret ever stepping foot into my life. Mike came through as I knew he would. By the end of the day, I had the information I needed. Ryan's life, his business, his connections. It was all laid out in front of me like a map, one I could use to track him down and destroy him. He thought he was untouchable, thought he could play me for a fool. But what he didn't know was that he had just walked into a war zone, and he didn't even have a weapon. I spent the next few nights preparing. My heart didn't race anymore when I thought about what I was going to do. It didn't need to. My mind was sharp, focused. I had learned to compartmentalize my emotions during my time in Iraq, and it served me well now. I wasn't doing this out of anger. I was doing it because it was the only way to get closure. Mike had found out everything about Ryan, his job, his address, even his family. It didn't take long to find out where he liked to hang out, either. A local bar where the rich and powerful went to unwind. It was the perfect place to make an impression. That Friday night, I walked in, dressed in dark clothes, blending into the shadows. I wasn't looking for a fight. Not yet. I just wanted to make my presence known. Ryan was sitting at the bar, talking to a few friends, laughing like everything in his life was still in order. Like nothing had changed. But it had. And tonight he was going to feel it. I walked up to the bar, stood a few feet away from him. My eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, the entire world seemed to pause. His smile faltered as he recognized me, but he didn't move, didn't speak. He didn't know how to react. "You look comfortable," I said, my voice low but loud enough for him to hear. He stiffened but didn't respond. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his friends shifted uncomfortably. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't understand what it was. Not yet. Ryan turned slowly toward me, his lips twitching into a forced grin. "What the hell do you want, Jack?" I leaned in closer, my breath cold against his ear. I'm here to remind you that nothing in this life is guaranteed. You took something from me. Now, I'm here to make sure you understand that." His eyes flickered with confusion and fear, but he still didn't speak. He thought he could brush me off, that he could intimidate me the way he had Megan. But I wasn't Megan. I wasn't some naive woman who would fall for his charm. "You think this is a game?" I asked, my voice rising now, drawing the attention of everyone around us. "You think you can just take my life and walk away without consequences?" Ryan stood up, his posture defensive. "You've got some nerve showing up here," he spat, his voice full of venom. "You think you can scare me, huh? You think I'm afraid of you?" I smiled, the kind of smile you give when you know the other person is already defeated. "You should be." Before he could react, I pulled out my phone and showed him a picture of his car, taken earlier that evening. A few seconds later, another photo popped up, this one of his business partner, and another one of his house. He stared at the images, his face draining of color. His cocky demeanor faltered. He could feel it now, he wasn't in control anymore. "You want to threaten me?" I said softly, coldly. "I can promise you, Ryan, I've seen much worse than your petty games. But I've got something far worse in mind for you." Ryan's voice wavered as he spoke, the arrogance now replaced by fear. "You're crazy, man." I leaned closer, my lips almost brushing his ear. "Crazy? No. Calculated? Yes. And you're about to learn exactly what happens when you take something that doesn't belong to you." I turned and walked out of the bar without another word, leaving him and his friends standing there, the weight of my presence sinking in. The game had just begun. The next few days were silent, but the air around me felt charged. I could sense Ryan's fear, even though he didn't show it openly. I knew he was already starting to feel the consequences of what he'd done. The messages from Mike kept coming in, showing me the small cracks that had started appearing in his life. The business deals he thought were secure were now shaky, his partners growing nervous. He hadn't even realized how deep I had already reached. I knew this was only the beginning. I wasn't just playing for revenge anymore. This was something more. It was about making him understand the weight of his actions, the destruction he'd caused by stepping into my life and taking what didn't belong to him. But Ryan wasn't the only one who was going to suffer. Megan had left, but I could still feel her lingering presence in the house. Her things were still scattered around, reminders of the life we had once shared. I knew I needed to erase every trace of her, to truly start fresh. I packed up her belongings and set them outside, letting them sit there for a few days. I wasn't going to be sentimental anymore. I had to let go. But as I prepared to move forward, something unexpected happened. I received a call late one night. It was from Megan. "Jack?" Her voice cracked, as if she hadn't spoken in days. "Please, I need to talk to you. I've made a huge mistake." The words hit me like a ton of bricks, but I didn't react immediately. I'd heard this before, the apologies, the pleas. She had already torn apart what we had. The moment she chose him, she had crossed a line, and nothing she said would change that. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her. I wasn't going to let her worm her way back into my life, but I wanted to see how far she was willing to go to save herself, how deep her guilt ran. When she arrived, she looked different, worn, thinner, broken. The woman who had once been so confident, so sure of herself, was gone. In her place was a woman desperate for forgiveness, a woman who had lost everything she thought she could take for granted. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to explain. I never meant to make you feel like you weren't enough for me. I love you, Jack. I always have. But I got lost. And now I don't know how to fix it." I looked at her, watching the tears well in her eyes. It was hard to feel anything for her at that moment. Sure, I could see that she was broken, but how much of that was real? How much of it was guilt? It didn't matter. The damage had been done, and I wasn't the man to forgive and forget. Not now, not after everything she had put me through. "You want forgiveness?" I said coldly, not even trying to mask the bitterness in my voice. "You threw everything away for him, Megan. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. And now you want me to just forget? Pretend like nothing happened. Her face twisted in pain, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, as if she understood the enormity of what I was saying. I could see the desperation in her eyes, but it didn't move me. She had already lost me, and no amount of tears would change that. You need to leave, I told her. I've moved on, Megan, and I'm not going to let you drag me back into your mess. You made your choice. She didn't protest this time. She just stood up, wiped her tears, and left. I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. I had already closed that chapter of my life. But as I sat alone in the house that night, I couldn't help but think about Ryan again. I had made him feel the consequences of his actions. But now it was time to make sure he understood that his life wasn't going to be the same. I wasn't done with him yet. Ryan thought he could control everything. Thought his money, his connections, his confidence could protect him from the consequences of what he had done. But in the world I had lived in, the world of calculated moves, where every decision could mean life or death, he had made a fatal mistake. He didn't understand who he was messing with. It had been a week since I showed up at the bar, and I could see that Ryan was getting nervous. The cracks in his life were deepening. His business deals were faltering, his partners were growing distant, and rumors were beginning to spread about his involvement with me. But the best part of it all was that Ryan hadn't even figured out why this was happening. He didn't know I had orchestrated it all. He didn't know I had put every piece of the puzzle together, strategically tearing his life apart, piece by piece. It was the perfect storm. His arrogance had blinded him to the people who were now pulling away from him. I had done my homework. Every thread of his life was being unraveled, and he had no idea where it was coming from. Then, one afternoon, I got the call that made everything feel real. It was Mike again, his voice heavy with grim news. Jack, it's done. He's in deep. We've hit every angle. His business partners are pulling out. He's losing money fast. The word on the street is that he's been tied up in some shady deals. And it's getting worse. There's a rumor he's about to lose everything. He's trying to fix it, but it's slipping through his fingers. I could almost hear the satisfaction in Mike's voice. He knew this was exactly what I wanted. He knew that nothing could make me feel better than watching Ryan squirm, watching him pay the price for what he had done. But it wasn't just about money or power. It was about teaching him the most painful lesson of all. That no matter how high you climb, no matter how untouchable you feel, everything can come crashing down in an instant. The next day, I saw Ryan again. This time, it wasn't at a bar or in some public setting. It was at his office. I knew where he worked, knew exactly what his routine was, and I also knew that he was on the brink of losing it all. I walked in, calm and composed, my footsteps echoing in the otherwise silent building. The receptionist barely looked up as I passed, too busy with her own work to notice the storm that was about to hit. When I reached his office door, I paused. The silence inside was deafening, and I knew he was waiting for me. He had to be. I knocked, just once. It wasn't to be polite, it was to let him know that I was in control. Ryan's voice came from behind the door, reluctant but laced with authority. Come in. I stepped inside, my gaze immediately locking onto him. He was sitting behind his massive desk, his hands clasped in front of him as if he were trying to look calm, trying to act like everything was still under his control. But I could see it in his eyes, the desperation. The cracks in his confidence were too wide to hide now. You look like a man who's losing control, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. How's that feel? Ryan's jaw clenched. You think you've won? You think this is all over? I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of cold, calculated certainty. It's over, Ryan. You just don't realize it yet. His eyes narrowed, the last of his pride flickering in the depths of his gaze. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you can't keep this up forever. I'll fix it. I'll get out of this. You won't win. I walked over to his desk and leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge. You're already out. It's already over. I've made sure of it. You just don't know how to let go of the illusion that you're in control. He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape against the floor. You've ruined everything, Jack. You've... Enough? I interrupted, my voice a sharp, commanding presence. I've only just begun. This isn't about me ruining your life, Ryan. This is about you finally realizing that there's always a cost. And it's time for you to pay up. His face twisted in anger, but the fear was starting to outweigh it now. He could feel it, the ground slipping from beneath his feet. He could no longer ignore the truth. He had underestimated me. Underestimated the extent to which I could make him feel the weight of his choices. And then, I said something I knew would cut deeper than anything else. You should have stayed away from my life, Ryan. But now I'm going to make sure you never forget the consequences of your actions. He opened his mouth to retort, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned and walked out of his office, leaving him to stew in the mess he had created. His empire was crumbling, and he couldn't even see it. But I saw it, and I knew that soon enough, Ryan's world would come crashing down completely. Ryan's world was falling apart faster than he could rebuild it. Every business deal he had depended on was crumbling. His relationships were eroding, and the lies he had built his life on were catching up with him. It was beautiful watching him break down, but the most satisfying part was knowing he still had no idea who had set the wheels in motion. A few days later, I got a call from Mike. He's done, Jack. His business is on the edge of bankruptcy. His investors are pulling out. He's panicking. I couldn't help but smile. Everything I'd planned was finally coming together. But I wasn't finished yet. I had one last move to make. That evening, I went to Ryan's house. It wasn't to confront him, not directly anyway. I had a different idea. I stood outside his mansion, looking up at the place that had once symbolized his success. It was all coming to an end. I pulled out my phone and sent him one final message. You didn't just lose your wife, Ryan. You've lost everything. I hope you're ready to watch it all burn. I pressed send and walked away, leaving him to wonder what would happen next. The fallout from my message was immediate. Within hours, Ryan's life began to unravel even faster. The press caught wind of his financial troubles, and stories about his questionable business practices started circulating. Investors pulled out, clients dropped him, and the once prominent businessman was now just a man struggling to salvage what little was left of his reputation. I stayed in the shadows, watching it all unfold. It wasn't about gloating anymore. I had achieved what I set out to do. Ryan had lost everything, his wealth, his connections, and most importantly, his sense of control. And then one final message came through. It was from Megan. Please, Jack. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Can we talk? I don't know where else to go. I ignored it. She had already made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. The dust settled. Ryan was left with nothing. He had no job, no money, and no friends. Megan tried reaching out a few more times, but I knew better than to let her back in. I had rebuilt my life without her, and I wasn't going to let the past tear it down. But as I sat in my quiet house, reflecting on everything that had happened, I couldn't help but wonder if any of it had been worth it. Sure, Ryan had paid the price. Megan had left, and I was free from the lies. But in the end, what did I really have? I had lost a part of myself in the pursuit of revenge. And as I stared at the empty space where Megan's things once were, I realized that sometimes the cost of vengeance is too high to pay. Now that the story is over, what do you think? Was Jack right to seek revenge? Or did he lose something far more valuable in the process? Let me know in the comments below. Your thoughts matter. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more intense, unpredictable stories like this one.